Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Phillips with Americans for Prosperity. Thank you for joining us for another in the series of conversations with key leaders in Congress that we're having. You know, the policy threats coming out of Washington, D.C., it's fast and furious. And by the way, that's a pretty good movie franchise too. But the threats are real, and we're working to oppose those at Americans for Prosperity. I've been on the road with our activists, many of you probably watching across the country, and Ron Kind's district in Wisconsin, and Connor Lamb's district in PA, the outside Pittsburgh area just a couple of nights ago, Augusta, Georgia, Allred's district, Cindy Axne's district in Iowa 3. We're out there, you're organizing, you're letting these folks know that you don't want to go toward more socialism and the loss of freedom and prosperity that will be attendant if we go that way. We have a guest that is new to Congress that we were really excited about and still are so much. So Candace from our AFP South Carolina team, take it away for the introduction.
Thanks so much, Tim, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Candace Carroll, the Interim State Director with Americans for Prosperity here in South Carolina. And this afternoon, I am so excited to welcome a true freedom fighter to our virtual AFP event, Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina. Representative Mace is in her first term in the U.S. House and has been at the forefront of the battle to stop this out-of-control spending in Washington, frankly, since you were elected. And prior to your time in Congress, you were really a champion at the State House for very similar things and voting against our state's bloated budget. So welcome, Representative Mace. We're very excited to have you this afternoon.
And thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with freedom fighters and AFP, always.
Absolutely. So diving right in, if you don't mind, so much that we're hearing right now about President Biden's $4 trillion so-called infrastructure plan. What are some of the provisions that you would say are in the current proposal from the White House that taxpayers, particularly in South Carolina and around the country, should be most concerned about?
Well, the biggest thing is that $1 out of every $2 spent on this monstrosity of a bill would go to Green New Deal type of spending, wasteful spending, as we all know. And when you look at the makeup of Congress right now, the November election was not a referendum on socialism or these progressive and radical ideologies that we're seeing seep into legislation and bills like an infrastructure bill. There is $100 billion in there for school construction. There's money in there, billions of dollars for school lunches, social justice, environmental justice, $174 billion for electric vehicles at the same time, but no provisions in there to secure the energy grid that this will affect, right? And very few cars or EVs on the road right now. There's just so much waste in this thing. And I'm a mom. I care about school lunches. I don't want my kids eating crappy pizza every day at school. I mean, but that's just not that's not traditional infrastructure. And I sit in traffic almost every day that I'm home. I'm taking my kids to school, I'm picking them up, driving to meetings. And I sit there in traffic just like everybody else in this country. So it's there's enormous waste throughout the bill. And we just had our House version. We had our House markup committee on Wednesday, went all through the night to Thursday morning at 5 a.m. was our final vote. But you know, Republicans had some pretty solid amendments that we put in. Many were nonpartisan and bipartisan and just thoughtful, meaningful amendments, and they wouldn't let them through, unfortunately, either.
Yeah. Representative Mace, I know that the first spending bill went through on, frankly, partisan lines. Every Republican voted no, and good for them in doing that in the House and the Senate. Terrible bill, 1.9 trillion. And now this $4 trillion boondoggle that you just detailed and Candace did as well. But this spending bill is even worse. It's more wasteful spending, more of the Green New Deal stuff that you mentioned, but it also has a tax increase component side. Can you share a little bit about what makes that so bad, even worse than the last spending bill with these tax provisions?
Right. Well, in order to pay for this thing, you know, you have to have probably the largest tax hike in American history.
Mm.
And the left likes to use key buzzwords like we're going to just tax the rich, by golly, and make corporations pay their fair share, right? Well, I mean, there are a lot of loopholes where the rich and the wealthy, as we saw recently in some of the news media reports, that pay very little in taxes when you compare the percentage of income to average hardworking Americans. Those costs get passed down to the little guy. They get passed down to small businesses. They get passed down to the consumer. One of the issues we're going to have is all this spending and tax hikes and tax increases, the debt 28 trillion, the deficit increasing as well, 3 trillion or so and counting, plus all of the money that's being printed. $4 trillion were printed last fiscal year. 4 trillion more will be printed this fiscal year, but it's going to be terrible for inflation. And already you saw the consumer price index. That increase was historically bad when those numbers came out this year. But inflation, I mean, I don't really think of President Biden. I think of President Carter, Jimmy Carter, the kind of inflation that the administration, those policies happened during his era, I think are very possible in our era. And you saw Deutsche Bank come out this week too, warning about inflation and what this is going to happen. But it's going to be the American worker. It's going to be small businesses that are going to end up paying those taxes because the prices of goods and services will go up. Make no doubt about it. Things are going to be much more expensive if we do this. Now, on the other side of that, Republicans, both in the House and the Senate, put forth measures, often bipartisan, much more trimmed down package, that infrastructure packages that had nothing to do with Green New Deal, but actually had to do with roads and bridges. The original package had 6% maybe going for roads and bridges. You had 1% for airports, less than 1% for waterways. Things that you would consider traditional infrastructure just weren't funded or were underfunded in that thing. So, but you saw Republicans. You had Senator Shelley Capito put forth a package, and every time Senator Capito would go to the table with the Biden administration, she'd come up in a number to almost 1 trillion, which again is historic in the amount of money that would be spent. But they proposed a way to do it without raising taxes by just using unspent COVID relief money. There's trillions of dollars out there that haven't been spent. I'm seeing, when I talk to counties here in South Carolina, they can't spend it. They can't spend it all. They're getting so much money, and they're coming to us asking, "Hey, is this kosher if we go spend it over here on something not related to COVID?" Right? There's so much money out there that's being wasted. If we just were able to put all that into infrastructure, we could do it without raising taxes.
Yeah, and you were talking about the price of goods and services will go up. They're already going up. We're seeing that at the pump, right? And so we're seeing that in stores. And so really hurting those folks who are trying to get to work and that are stuck in traffic, like you mentioned, or like I am up in Greenville. And so, we have people who are stuck in traffic who can't afford gas. We saw the price go, with the pipeline earlier, and just the debacle that all of that was. And so just the ripple effect that all of this is creating.
Cyber
as well,
attacks, are also adding cost to everything. And grocery store prices, they're up about 21% and going up, increasing every week. Gas, I know I'm paying just under $3. I think $2.85 at the beginning of the year. I was paying $2.05. So that's gone up significantly. Price of lumber has gone up 381%. So if you are trying to build a home, your overall cost may be 30% higher than they were when you first started. That is very, very scary what that kind of impact negatively could impact on consumers in the future. It's terrible.
Ladies and gentlemen watching, make your voice heard. It's a big moment for the country. There's an I volunteer link right there in this Facebook feed. Click on that. Send your message to vote no against some of the policies that we're talking about with Representative Mace and with Candace from our AFP South Carolina team. It'll take about 1 minute and 15 seconds of your time, but it'll let your House member and both of your senators know that you expect them to stand up and vote no. And I know sometimes you think, well, gosh, my member is one of the good folks up there. They're going to vote right. They need to be encouraged. They need to know that folks back home have their back. That's important. It's a good thing. And you may be thinking, well, gosh, my member or my senator, they're liberal. They're going to vote for all this stuff. I worked on Capitol Hill as a chief of staff like 800 years ago. It's been a while, but this is still the case. Every member, every day has a briefing with how many folks from their district or state are calling or emailing or contacting them, what the issues are, and whether it's yes, no. They want to know the pulse of their district or their state. And so if a member who's, a left of center or very liberal, if they know they're getting hundreds or hopefully thousands of folks saying, hey, stand up to those party leaders, to the really extremist folks, Pelosi, et cetera, AOC, et cetera, and vote your district. It does matter. It makes a difference. So make your voice heard. Click on that I volunteer link. It's a great way for you to get involved. You can also post on your social media and talk to your circle of friends. But Congresswoman Mace, we've talked about the tax increases. We've talked about all the spending and the inflation. Give us a sense of the time frame. I know Speaker Pelosi has been saying, hey, we're going to try to move quickly. Can you give us some insight on what these next few weeks look like and how you're sensing this, what is a really big battle for the country, is going?
Right. And so the Transportation Infrastructure Committee that I sit on, we just passed the infrastructure. I, of course, voted against it, passed the infrastructure bill out of the House committee. So it'll come to the floor for a vote by the entire House of Representatives. Could be as early as next week. We are back in session on Monday. Our first vote series of next week starts Monday night. So it could be as early as next week when that bill goes to the Senate. I don't see the Senate taking up this bill or taking it realistically. It's not going to pass the Senate. The Senate tends to be a little more deliberative, and there are members over there that this kind of wasteful spending is just not going to fly with them. And it's been the Senate that's really been leading a more nonpartisan effort on the infrastructure bill. But the question comes down to how we're going to pay for it. But our votes will start on Monday night. It could be as early as next week when we vote this bill, this monstrosity, out of the House.
And with that, with your colleagues, when it goes to the floor for the House, do you think it will go strictly partisan, like we've seen the bills go earlier this year, or do you think that there's some of your colleagues who we might could pull over from the Democratic side?
I don't think you'll see a single Democrat vote against this bill. I think it'll be very unlikely. They've done a really good job of holding themselves together. You might actually even see a few Republicans voting for it when it gets to the floor next week. Which seems shocking, but that could be the thing that does happen next week. So it's a scary time that we're in. This kind of spending is untenable. We don't have the money. We can't print it fast enough to fill that void, to fill that gap. And so the ripple effect is going to be for decades to come. And the thing is, this doesn't happen yesterday either. Republicans and Democrats alike have been responsible for the growing debt and deficit that we have each year over year. It's not like this is just now coming up now. The kind of spending that the Biden administration is talking about just for this year is astronomical. And I can't think of a worse idea than raising taxes. And I know that, Biden has talked about, hey, we're gonna for corporations paying zero, we're gonna make them pay 15% now. Well, if it were 15% for everybody across the board, imagine how many jobs we could save that won't be exported overseas. Imagine the cost of goods and services and how that will dramatically go down, and people will have better wages, better salaries, better benefits, better jobs, and flexibility there. And so that's what happened under the Trump administration. We had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act by lowering the corporate tax rate, lowering individual income taxes. Our economy was flourishing, and we can do that again. The problem is the federal government's just getting in the way of us being successful, entrepreneurs being successful, individuals being successful in the near term.
Yeah, and you talk about that corporate income tax that was cut under the Trump administration, and the Republicans, on frankly a straight party line vote, they had crucial tax cuts and tax reform. It made American businesses far more competitive against China and India and other places. A big difference. And when people hear the corporate rate, they think, oh, well, it's a big conglomerate. They can handle it. But the vast majority of these corporations that will see their taxes raised, they have 30, 40 employees. They're often mom and pop operations, and they just came out of a brutal pandemic. They're trying to get their footing back, and the idea of hitting them, these small businesses, with a crippling tax is so frustrating. I wish these members from the left would get out there and actually talk to some of the folks I know I see out on the road who really are looking at these tax increases and shaking their heads and going, like, I don't know how I'm going to get moving again.
Right. And if you talk to some of these businesses too, And they're struggling right now because they can't get people to come back to work. The federal government has incentivized people to stay home. We are literally paying people to stay home. And I remember the day just a couple of weeks ago when the governor of Montana announced he was going to forego the federal unemployment benefit, and when Biden got sworn in, it went from 300 to 400 a month, so it became worse. And then a couple hours later, the governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, then committed to doing the same thing. A couple of days later, it was Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis. So we're seeing these Republican governors say, we've got the jobs, that they're here, they're available. We are safely operating with COVID-19. I know in South Carolina at one point a few weeks ago, we had 85,000 jobs available throughout the state of South Carolina, and we had 116,000 people on unemployment. So essentially, if you want a job right now, you could have a job right now. But on June 24th, I believe, is the day that those benefits go away. So I encourage everyone that is getting an unemployment check, get in line now, apply now, negotiate a better salary, better benefits before everybody else is applying for that same job here in a few weeks. So the opportunities are there, they abound, but it's the government that is getting in the way of small businesses being successful. So if you're going to tack on taxes on top of that, imagine the number of businesses that are going to have to close as a result of that decision by the Biden administration and by Pelosi. I mean, she's really running the show.
And we've seen, pieces of the PRO Act too that have been put into the infrastructure package or proposed into the infrastructure package that are going to hurt states like South Carolina that are right to work states as well, which is just going to add to the number of people who, aren't going to go back to work or want to negotiate things even more, and really strip away the ability to have that work flexibility that we do in South Carolina with not having to be forced to join a union as part of your employment.
Right, and unions cost businesses even more money. And South Carolina is a right to work to state. I remember my very first job at a school. I taught myself to code when I was in college, and not that I have anything more to do at this detail than that, but I taught myself to code. So I took a job with Anderson Consulting back then. It's now Accenture. And I remember in this very first job, I learned about unions because we were analysts at the time, and we were hired to go in and correct a specific industry billing system for a client because they had union workers that were working on the billing system at the same time, but they were only required to correct the records in that billing system like 4 an hour. That because of the union, what they've negotiated, they only had to do 4 accounts an hour. Well, you get, an analyst in there, 20-something analyst that loves to code and loves technology, loves database work. I mean, we were doing 20 to 25 an hour because we were paid to do a job. We worked every minute during that time that that our job required, and we got a lot more done. We saved the company millions of dollars. And unions kill innovation, and they kill opportunity, and they kill entrepreneurship in this country.
I thought it was telling when the administration was talking about job creation. They always say union job creation, as if that's the only kind of job creation that is acceptable. And it's not. I grew up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, the other end of the state from you, Representative Mace. And I know my mom, she worked a 4 to midnight shift at a wire plant, and there would be union organizing efforts. And she would always say, well, at least when it comes down to the union election, I'll have the secret ballot. They're not going to know how I vote. But this PRO Act, in addition to wiping out South Carolina's right to work, it'll take away the dignity of the secret ballot when a union election is occurring from people like my mom. And she's retired now. But I can't imagine folks who had felt vulnerable, who would have been open to pressure, losing the dignity and the privacy of the secret ballot. So that's so important in the Senate. Congresswoman Mace,
and unions are bullies. I want to add one more thing. Unions are bullies. Look at what the teachers unions did this year during COVID-19. Hey, we'll get our teachers vaccinated. They'll come back to school. They got them vaccinated in Virginia. They didn't go back to school, right? These folks are bullies. And I do want to add one thing, kind of tongue in cheek here, but about a week and a half ago, my house was vandalized and spray painted with Antifa and anarchist stuff and curse words and everything. But one of the things they spray painted on my house was pass the PRO Act. Little did they know, I already voted against it, and it was already out of the house. So, if you're an anarchist, Antifa sympathizer, and you want us to pass the bill, I think you're a little confused, but I find that quite a little ironic. But I voted against it, voting against obviously the infrastructure bill as well for many, many reasons. But.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to a point of wrapping up, and I want to touch on one more thing, and that's the I Volunteer link right there. Click on it, make your voice heard, folks that are watching. Over 500,000 of your fellow Americans have made their voices heard this year alone through that portal. I Volunteer link, it's fast and easy. Representative Mace, we've talked about some tough challenges our nation is facing, and they're tough and they're serious, no question about that. I also know you, and you're an optimistic person, and you have a sense of what's possible in this country and in your state of South Carolina. Can you give us a sense as we wrap up today, why you're optimistic despite the challenges and issues we face in this country today?
Well, I work really hard, and so where I can't see progress on the things that I really care about, I focus on my district. And one of the things that we did in the first 100 days was return $2 million to taxpayers in the district. The IRS was holding up tax refunds. If your refund was missing, we got it for you. If you needed Social Security benefits or VA benefits, we got it for you. So that focus has been really important in helping those people that needed to get their money back from the government. But the other thing is too, is that where I can work with folks, there are a handful of folks that are willing to work together. I just passed a bill at a VA committee with folks on both sides of the aisle to help veterans' families of service members who died in service or are disabled. And the other thing that's really a passion of mine too is civil rights, prison reform, criminal justice reform kinds of issues. And I passed a civil rights bill with folks on the other side of the aisle back in February on my 50th day in office. It's something I did as a state lawmaker when I passed a prison reform bill last year in the middle of COVID, in the middle of a congressional campaign. And so finding those small pockets where I can do work, where I'm not sacrificing my values, my beliefs, or my principles, and getting some of that done. Now, fast forward 15 months from now, 18 months from now, we're going to have, I believe, a very strong showing in 2022. And the ability for us to keep seats like mine, I'm in a swing district, and then go after and get a majority back. We need 6 or 7 seats to have a very, very slim majority. And what we'll be able to do after that is what gives me great optimism for the future. We can turn this around if we can get the majority in the House in a year and a half. And that's what all of us should be working toward as well.
Well
Yeah,
said.
absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, you were hearing from Congresswoman Nancy Mace, freshman member from my home state of South Carolina. Our sister organization, Americans for Prosperity Action.
So just to jump in real quick, we're really excited to continue this conversation with you, Representative Mace, and just wanted to let everyone know about the upcoming in-person event that we're doing with you in Charleston on Monday, June 21st at the Charleston Harbor Fish House. So we're really excited about that event and would love for your constituents to come out and join us in person for that, to continue this really important conversation. And the venue is going to be great, and we'll have a backdrop similar to what you have up today, being able to show the Ravenel Bridge and the port right behind us, and really juxtapose that traditional infrastructure that we do support versus what's being proposed by the Biden administration. So look forward to seeing you in person there for sure.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to all of our viewers today as well.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nancy.